By the time the first body was misidentified, 2 lives were already balanced on the edge of erasure. The case file opens with a time stamp, 3:17 a.m. That's when Emily Ward clocked out of St. Luke's Hospital for the last time anyone officially remembers. 28 years old. Night shift nurse. Reliable, quiet. The kind of person whose disappearance feels impossible until it happens. Within hours, her name would be printed on flyers, whispered over police radios, and typed into search bars by strangers who had already decided how her story would end. What no one knew, what no one thought to ask, was that Emily Ward was not missing. She was hiding. And she was doing it because staying alive meant letting the world believe she was dead. The stakes were simple and cruel from the beginning. If Emily was found, someone would silence her. If she stayed hidden, everyone she loved would mourn a woman who still breathed. And there was only one person who understood both sides of that bargain. Daniel Reyes. Daniel loved Emily long before the case number existed. That fact isn't in the file, but it's everywhere else in the unsent drafts on his phone, in the way his statements avoid her name, in the pause that appears every time an investigator asks when he last saw her. He last saw her alive in the rain. Security footage shows Emily exiting the hospital under the awning, her bag slung over one shoulder, her hair still pinned from a 12-hour shift. She pauses when she sees Daniel's car across the street, engine running, headlights off. That pause lasts exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds where she considers going home. 2 seconds where she decides not to. She gets into the passenger seat without a word. 6 minutes later, her phone pings for the last time near the river access road. After that, there is nothing. No calls, no texts, no activity. A clean digital death. By sunrise, her sister is calling emergency rooms, voice tight with panic. By noon, her mother is sitting across from a detective, answering questions she never imagined would exist. By nightfall, the internet has already built a timeline, a suspect list, and a conclusion. Emily Ward didn't make it home. What the internet doesn't see is the motel room 2 states away, the curtains drawn, the television muted. Emily sitting on the edge of the bathtub while Daniel listens to a police scanner and pretends his hands aren't shaking. Emily keeps asking the same question. Is this really happening? Daniel doesn't answer. Because if he does, he'll have to say yes. 2 weeks earlier, Emily had learned something she was never meant to hear. It came the way dangerous information often does not in a dramatic confession, but in fragments. A patient half sedated, mistaking her for someone else. Numbers muttered between labored breaths. Names repeated like prayers. A shipping schedule that didn't line up with anything in the hospital system. Emily did what nurses are trained to do. She listened. She documented. She flagged it quietly. That's where the mistake happened. The man in the bed wasn't just a patient. He was an accountant. Not the kind who wears suits or files taxes, but the kind who keeps entire criminal operations clean by burying money under legitimate institutions. Hospital foundations. Medical charities. Places no one wants to look too closely. When Emily flagged the information, she didn't know she was lighting a fuse. By the time Daniel found out, the threat assessment had already begun. Daniel was a former public defender, recently unemployed, and still just connected enough to recognize danger when it brushed past him. The warning came disguised as concern from an old colleague, off the record and after hours. Has Emily mentioned anything strange? Anyone talking too much? Anyone who shouldn't? Daniel said no. Then he drove straight to the hospital. That night, when Emily got into his car, she didn't ask where they were going. She asked if he was scared. He was terrified, not of being followed, not of being arrested, but of what he was about to ask her to lose. The official search began the next morning. Dogs, drones, divers in the river where her phone last pinged, candlelight vigils that hardened into quiet grief by the end of the first week. Her photo everywhere, smiling, alive, already past tense. On day 4, they pulled the body from the water. Female, same height, similar build, hair darkened by the river. Identification took longer than usual. The news didn't wait. Body found in search for missing nurse. By the time dental records raised questions, the damage was done. Emily Ward was presumed dead. Daniel watched the broadcast from that motel room. He didn't move. He didn't blink. Emily slid down the bathroom wall and pressed her fists into her mouth to keep from screaming as she watched her own mother collapse into grief on live television. This is where the story splits, depending on who's telling it. The police believe Daniel fled in guilt. Emily's family believes he knows more than he ever said. Strangers online believe he killed her. The truth is less satisfying and far more dangerous. Emily was placed into temporary protective custody under a different name, in a town chosen specifically because nothing ever happened there. A diner by the water, a rented room above it, a new driver's license with a name that felt wrong in her mouth. She practiced answering to it anyway. Daniel wasn't supposed to stay in her life. He wasn't supposed to know where she went. The plan was distance, silence, survival. But love does not dissolve just because it's inconvenient. And neither does fear. For 6 months, Emily lived as someone else. She learned the rhythm of the diner, the regulars, the sound of the ocean at night. She learned how to smile without meaning it, and how to stop looking over her shoulder every time a car slowed down. Daniel visited once. He stood across the street and watched her through the window, laughing with a customer who didn't know her real name. The sound of it carried farther than it used to. He stayed exactly 3 minutes. Then he left without speaking to her. Because loving someone sometimes means letting them live without you. The arrests came quietly. Accounts frozen. Charges filed. A statement released and forgotten within days. The hospital moved on. The case was officially closed. Emily stayed hidden anyway. Daniel tried to forget. He didn't. A year later on another Tuesday, the past knocked softly instead of kicking the door down. Emily wasn't supposed to reach out. Her protection status had ended on paper, but not in reality. She had been advised to remain untraceable, invisible. She called Daniel anyway. The call lasted 12 seconds. She said his name. She said she was safe. She said she was sorry. Then she hung up. Daniel was already grabbing his keys. He didn't know she had been followed. Not yet. Daniel drove through the night without stopping. He didn't think about consequences. He didn't think about how many rules he was breaking or how thin the protection around Emily had always been. He focused on the road and the memory of her voice, steady, controlled, but threaded with something he hadn't heard before. Fear. Emily noticed the man in the baseball cap 3 days before Daniel arrived. He came in just after sunset, ordered coffee, and chose the booth closest to the door. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at her. He watched the reflection in the window instead, eyes moving every time someone passed behind him. Emily felt it immediately, that cold recognition, the one you can't explain without sounding paranoid. Her hand stayed steady as she poured the coffee. Years of night shifts had trained her well. He never drank it. The next night, the same man sat at the counter. Same cap, different jacket. This time, he paid in cash and asked her name. She used the wrong one. He smiled like he already knew. By the third night, a car idled across the street with its lights off. Not long enough to be obvious. Just long enough to be deliberate. Emily didn't run. Running was what had nearly gotten her killed the first time. Instead, she waited. She positioned herself where the security camera caught the whole room. She memorized the license plate across the street. She kept her phone in her pocket, unlocked, thumb hovering over Daniel's name, even though she told herself she wouldn't call again. The man in the cap came in just before closing. This time, he didn't sit. He stood near the counter and glanced at the door every few seconds, like he was waiting for someone else to arrive. Daniel pushed through the diner door at exactly that moment. The bell rang. The sound cut clean through the room. For half a second, everything froze. The man in the cap stiffened. His hand slipped into his jacket pocket, not a weapon, just a phone. He was already backing toward the door. Daniel saw him. Emily saw the decision form in the man's eyes. And then it was over. The man left. No confrontation. No drama. Just a choice not to escalate. Not here, not now. Later, investigators would say the operation had fractured. The arrests had scared the right people. There was no incentive to pull loose threads anymore. But in that moment, Emily didn't know that. She walked out from behind the counter slowly, like the floor might shift beneath her feet. Daniel was still standing by the door. Neither of them spoke for a long time. When Emily finally crossed the space between them, she didn't run. She didn't cry. She rested her forehead against his chest and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a year. Daniel held her like she might disappear again if he didn't. They stayed that way until the sun came up. When the diner closed for good that night, Emily never went back. The paperwork took months. Reinstated identity, affidavits, quiet apologies from agencies that never quite said they were wrong. Emily Ward reappeared in the system like a ghost reclaiming her body. Her mother answered the door, expecting groceries. She collapsed instead. There is no clean way to reunite with people who have already buried you. Grief doesn't evaporate. It drains slowly, leaving behind exhaustion and disbelief. Emily's sister didn't let go of her for an hour. Her mother kept touching her face, her hands, her hair, like she was confirming a miracle would stay solid. Daniel waited at the edge of the room. He didn't know what place he was allowed to occupy in an ending like this. Emily chose it for him. She crossed the living room and took his hand without asking permission. No speech. No announcement. Just a fact made visible. They stayed. Emily testified quietly, once, behind closed doors. After that, her role in the case ended for good. The headlines never corrected themselves. To the public, she remained a tragedy with an asterisk. She didn't try to fix that. She built a different life instead. They moved into a small house with too much light and a backyard that flooded when it rained. Daniel took a job at a legal aid clinic, the kind that never makes the news, but changes lives anyway. Emily went back to nursing, choosing a daytime shift this time. On Tuesdays, they cooked dinner together. They turned off their phones. No news, no notifications. Just the quiet proof that they were still there. Sometimes Emily wore her hair dark. Sometimes Daniel still checked reflections in windows. Survival leaves habits behind. But real love leaves something stronger. It leaves a future. The case file ends with a simple line. Status, closed. It doesn't mention the way Emily laughs now, unafraid of being heard. It doesn't mention the way Daniel reaches for her hand automatically, like a reflex he's finally allowed to keep. But I know, because stories like this don't end when the danger passes. They end when two people stop disappearing from each other's lives. And this time, they stayed. I upload content daily, so what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button.